Good evening and welcome to the June meeting of the ad hoc affordable housing meeting of the Common Council of the City of Norwalk. We are eager to start our meeting today, and we will call the meeting to order at 6:05 today, and we will follow it with the roll call. I have on my screen Councilperson Jen McMurray, Councilperson Greg Barnett, Councilperson Nora Najeski Eichner, Councilperson Darlene Young. That is all I see on my screen. If there's any other people to join, we will acknowledge them at the time. Moving right along, can I have a motion of the approval of the February 15, 2023 committee meeting minutes?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Thank you, Chair Burnett. Is there a second? Oh, wrong thing. All those in favor? Raise your hand virtually or physically. Okay.
Aye.
Was that Jen or Nora?
It was Nora. I abstain, Chair.
Okay. We have 4 for it, no nays, and 1 abstention. Thank you. The next, is there anybody for public participation? Michelle, I didn't see anything.
It looks like we have 2 members of the public on tonight. So if you'd like to participate in public comment, please use the raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen and we'll bring you over to speak if you'd like. Don't see any hands at the moment.
Okay. So we will close public participation without anyone participating. Tonight, my fellow colleagues, we have a presentation by Ms. Woods from the Housing Collective here in Norwalk. As you know, the last couple of months, we have done good work in putting together an ordinance that has been sent to the ordinance. But in retrospection, we kind of took a second look after many of the comments that came back during the ordinance committee's first look at the document. And we noticed that we had some outstanding questions and there were some areas that we needed additional information for. We all agreed that affordable housing is important. So I felt that it was good at this time to slow ourselves down to make sure that that ordinance was as good as we could get it. I did not want to rush the process and just put it through and then we had to go back and redo it. And so we now have with us today, Ms. Woods, who will be giving us a presentation to give us some more information on this affordable housing and what it looks like here in Fairfield County and how we can better understand it, put a ordinance together that really has some teeth, as well as prepare for the next steps or the following steps, which will be more public participation, a plan in all of that. So I'll let Ms. Woods start now and she can introduce her colleague.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicole. And thank you, Nora, as well for inviting me here and giving me a little context. My name is Aisha Woods, and I am the director of the Fairfield County Center for Housing Opportunity, which is part of the Housing Collective. We're physically based in Bridgeport, but my work really encompasses all of Fairfield County. And we're really excited and encouraged by some of the work going on in Norwalk. We've been spending some more time there. We recently had an exhibit at Norwalk Community College called The Practice of Democracy. And tomorrow morning, we're having our Housing Equity Coalition breakfast at the Norwalk First Congregational Church. So I'm very pleased to be here. I also want to introduce Mary Delka Fermin, who is interning with us at the Housing Collective this summer. Mari, do you just want to say a couple words about who you are?
Hi, my name is Maridoka Furman. I am currently interning under Aisha Woods, and I recently graduated Southern Connecticut State University with a master's in political science, and I'm here to help.
Great, thanks, Mari. So I will I know everybody wants to go to the zoning commission, so I will get into the presentation. When Nora and Nicole reached out, they asked specifically about deed restrictions for affordable housing. So I've really, sort of centered this particular presentation around that question, but happy to, have a broader discussion about affordable housing strategies. So I will share my screen and let's see. So can everybody see my screen? Now we'll go to slideshow. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, just a little background on Fairfield County Center for Housing Opportunity. It's really a regional response to address shortage of housing in Fairfield County overall, and really to look at how to make housing affordable to people of all incomes and stages of life. And we do this through focusing on production. So that's new building, building new housing, increasing the supply, but also preservation of existing affordable housing, and then protection for the residents who live in affordable housing. And our priority areas are capacity building and technical assistance. And we also work on narrative change and looking at how we can change the conversation about affordable housing, because I know that's a challenge in a lot of our Fairfield County towns. So very quickly, I think we've been through intros. I will just do a couple, level setting definitions, acronyms. You may all be familiar with it, so we don't have to spend too much time on that. A little spotlight on the Norwalk ordinance, excuse the typo there. And then we'll look at some variables and some issues around deed restriction implementation, and then other models of shared equity. Just these may be all things that are familiar to you, and I will share this presentation with you afterwards, so that if you want to, so instead of me reading through everything, but just basic concepts. Deed restricted home ownership, it's a mechanism for preserving long-term affordability of units. And it's usually involves either a government subsidy or some kind of zoning measure or other incentive to, to make that possible. Affordable housing, we use HUD definitions, so that's 30% of gross income for housing costs. And the area median income, this is sometimes a figure that becomes a little bit of a sticking point, because it usually takes an area that's larger than a particular municipality. So for Norwalk, you're also including, the Norwalk Stanford area. And so that, and all the towns in between. So that may kind of skew the median income compared to an average Norwalk resident. And then we all know Connecticut Department of Housing, CHAFA is mentioned, and HUD as the primary funders of affordable housing. Some facts about Norwalk, and these you may know already, and there's certainly, I can share resources to really dig into these facts, but the area median income is high, but that doesn't mean that everyone is a high earner. It's skewed again by encompassing also the suburban towns. An affordable rent for a family at 30% AMI is $1,357, and that's for a 1-bedroom. But the the median gross rent, not the average, the median gross rent in Norwalk is, above 1750. These are numbers from 2021, so they may have gone up. But you can see there's a gap between what folks at the lower income levels are able to afford versus what's out on the market. We measured this in 2018, and I'll give you a link to the report, but we found that there was a gap of 3,635 units for renters at 30% or less AMI in Norwalk specifically. And then I just have some figures from the Connecticut Housing Appeals List of your existing either deed restricted or assisted units. And that's from the 2022 appeals list. So I just started, I realize you've been working on this. Nicole and Nora did send me some references to look at. And as I understand, this is the current draft regulations. And they're very straightforward. You are proposing workforce housing units for sale. And I just want to clarify, I'm focusing on the homeowner piece because I think that was what I was asked to focus on. The need is, equal, if not greater, in the rental market. So I don't want to, I'm not downplaying the need for the rental market. But for the workforce housing units for sale, the way this ordinance draft is currently worded is fairly straightforward. Resale price shall not exceed the then maximum sales price for said workforce housing unit as determined in accordance with subsection 612.411. Or the sum of the original purchase price plus the cost of any fixed improvements. And that's pretty standard. And then if you go to the section that you reference, it is in accordance with the 830G, the 830G section of Connecticut state statutes. So just to remind ourselves, when we're looking at affordable housing deed restrictions, and this is very common in Connecticut, it's used, for Norwalk is not subject to the 830G requirements because you do have more than 10% affordable housing, but it's still a useful, set of criteria to align with. So in the 830G, regarding deed restrictions, the affordability period is 40 years. The number of affordable units, and again, this is slightly skewed towards multifamily developments, but at least 30% of the units need to be affordable. The definition of affordable is 30% or less of annual income towards housing costs. And then in the 830G, there's some additional targets. So some of the units are for 60% AMI and others are for 80%. And that's typically what we think of as workforce housing. So, it may be teachers, folks that are working on your city staff, may have incomes in that from the 60 to 80% AMI. Some of the other considerations would be implementation. So how are you going to enforce that folks who are income qualifying are the ones who are getting the benefits for any affordable home ownership programs that you do? And so that's typically done through assigning somebody or a city agency or a third party to do the annual monitoring, and also to have a specific affordability plan. And some of the different things to consider are what your income qualifications are. If you want to focus it on first-time home buyers, if you want to require a homeowner education as part of it. If there is state or federal funding, there's typically an affirmative fair housing plan that needs to also accompany a program like this. There are some different ways to think about resale price at future sales. And you may want to consider alignment with other programs such as down payment assistance, rehabilitation funds. I know Norwalk has a robust program there, and some of the energy upgrade programs. And then you can also think about a homeowner program that includes, that is for small multifamily. So having a +1 unit or an ADU to be rented at below market rate as part of your homeowner benefits. And feel free to jump in if you need any clarification questions. So some things, like this is getting a little into the weeds, but some of the recommendations from Local Housing Solutions are, again, emphasize the monitoring and enforcement. And when you do a deed restriction, it runs with the land. So at the time of sale, that will come up, but you still need the annual kind of monitoring to make sure that, the folks, if you have an owner occupancy requirement, that the owners are living there, and some of the other, whatever your eligibility criteria is still current.
Excuse me, Michelle, can we just interject? I did see my colleague, Councilperson Darlene Young had her hand up for a question.
Okay, sorry about that, Darlene.
Oh, thank you. So could you just repeat what you said about the deed restriction again? I guess number one, just go over that a little bit. You said about deed restrictions. You were just going through that. If you could just explain it a little bit more.
Sure.
A bit more detail.
Yeah, so I can go back to the previous slide.
That would be great, because my question was about affordability period. Is the 40 years typical, or have you seen less years or more years?
So the answer is this is typical for what the Department of Housing in the state of Connecticut looks like for counting a unit as affordable under the 830G statute. So they have certain criteria. The unit needs to be deed restricted for 40 years. So this aligns with a couple different public funding streams, but there are other options. I think even in the Connecticut statute, it's a little bit different for ADUs, which is accessory dwelling units. Sorry to use the acronym. And sometimes it's longer and sometimes it's less.
And so that just depends on, and so are 99-year deed restrictions a normal thing, or something that, is done in across the state? Have you?
Yeah. So for inclusionary zoning, sometimes when the intention is really to make something permanently affordable, 99, if the intent is for it to be permanent, 99 years it's essentially a permanent affordable housing unit. Because that is, typically the useful life, or more than the useful life of most buildings today, but
and then I'm sorry, I had a lot of questions with our committee prior talking about this. And so the resale or price value is set based on them. So with deed restrictions that long and people living in those restricted units or apartments, have you seen that the resale value has been tweaked at all? Have there been developments that have looked to change that? Like, what's been your history with that? And in full transparency, I am one that lives in a 99-year deed restricted development.
Mhm.
And so I'm just having these questions. So I think this is very timely for me.
Great. So I've seen a couple different different ways of addressing that. So obviously the affordability period is the period where the deed is active and the property is required to, either be occupied or rented to somebody that meets certain income eligibility. There are examples and there's different formulas and this doesn't, it may be something that can be worked out in the implementation rather than set in stone in the ordinance. But there are formulas like adding, a certain percentage of property appreciation, because obviously over a 40-year period, the value of the property changes quite a bit. So there are instances where there's a reasonable appreciation that's allowable in the resale value. The other factor that's sometimes used is while people's incomes don't go up as quickly in general, as quickly as property values have gone up in this particular part of the world lately, some formulas do, incrementally add or assume that the AMI will keep going up, which it generally does over time. And so they also adjust, the eligibility, or they take that into account.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Sure thing. And I'll get into, these are a couple more details. So thinking about, if this is a new program for the city of Norwalk, really thinking about the, who's going to administer it is important, like what department it sits in. And that there is a plan or a kind of manual attached to it to ensure also that the protections are identified and enforced when a home is sold. Some communities file a lien. I haven't seen that. That's a little bit more, that would be more restrictive if you were worried that this was going to go on the books and people weren't going to follow it down the road. That's an option. And then this, I just wanted to mention this. This was something from Local Housing Solutions, but they mentioned deed restrictions are typically subordinated to the borrower's first mortgage. So the mortgage holders, and so the bank's interest takes precedent. And if, in this case, they were saying if there's a foreclosure, that possibly the deed restriction could become null at that point. So I don't know enough about the the legal technicalities on that, but it's something. So for that reason, often there is homeowner educations attached to an affordable home ownership program, and also some continuing supports in making sure that there's foreclosure prevention. And those are more things, those are less ordinance things, but I think more, program design issues. I think so how do you figure out like your eligibility? Because all of these things will eventually go into the deed restriction as well. And I think, because Norwalk is working with a consultant now to work on the affordable housing plan, I think, having a robust housing needs analysis that looks at both like what a reasonable income level for home ownership and what doing a feasibility analysis based on your real estate market is important. So you're setting your eligibility thresholds in ways that make sense. And then I just, sorry, I'm jumping around on these a little bit, but in terms of occupancy requirements, I mean, if you're thinking about if the goal is to have people in a place long-term, you know, also consider multi-generational and extended families so that, you know, the deed restriction is not totally required, you know, doesn't identify one single person as the person that can be the occupant. And that's just something to think about. So like if mom wants to pass a home to her children and she needs to go, you know, live in a care facility, you know, just thinking about how that passes on is something to think about. And then again, another thing to think about is, you know, sort of expanding the idea of single family. HUD defines single family as 1 to 4. So in your home ownership program, you can also think about that so that homeowners have some additional income streams. Just for, you know, for any state funding or federal funding, you typically need an affirmative fair housing plan. And I just took just some excerpts from CHFA, and I think this is, you know, something that your city staff will be familiar with. But just, you know, a commitment to not discriminate. And then also, again, a means for, you know, accountability on that. So having somebody who is in charge of ensuring fair housing laws are being followed. And it's always, if you're, you know, as you're thinking about your program, I know you're focusing on the ordinance, but the ordinance will kind of lay the groundwork for what the program looks like. You know, also think about alignment with other funding streams. And these are just a few. So if there's CDBG money that's available or other funding through the city, or other tools to help it make, you know, that can be layered onto, you know, an affordable home ownership not the deed restriction. Now we're talking a little bit more about the program. But when you're thinking about your deed restriction, you want to make sure that you don't preclude stacking whatever the home ownership program is with other funding opportunities. And I think your staff will be able to, you know, clearly lay that out for you, the city staff. Just quickly, I'm you know, sensitive to time because it's important to show up at zoning, but just some examples. Again, the Connecticut Department of Housing, you know, requires deed restrictions for their home funds. So they set requirements for income eligibility and income verification process. They do an annual recertification. So again, that's thinking about where the capacity is in your city agencies. Home funds required that the principal residence is maintained throughout the compliance period. So it has to be an owner occupant for home funds. And deed restriction is filed. So when you're, you know, closing the agreement, a deed restriction needs to be included in that to DOH. And there's no prohibition on the sale of properties for home funds, but there is a recapture provision. And I think that's, you know, if you sell it early, you have to pay back the state some of that funding. I'm just putting this up as an example. And again, another set of state regulations in the 830G affordability plan. And this is a little bit repetitive. These are just two, similar sets of requirements, but it requires designating a state, a city agency that would do the compliance, having an affirmative fair housing plan, marketing plan. So that's also, showing that you're marketing this program to a diverse set of residents. And then a calculation of the sales price, description of the affordable dwelling unit, and draft zoning regulations. So this is when towns are accounting for their affordable units under 830G. These are the requirements that the state has. And I just pulled them up here. Again, Norwalk is, it's not, it still has to report to the state on its affordable housing units, but it's just useful because these are other practices of deed restrictions for affordable housing in the state. This was an interesting example. I thought this is in Colorado. I'm not sure if, how it lines up with our state statutes, but what the city did is they gave the homeowners a lump sum in order to put a deed restriction on the property. And there was no price appreciation cap. They have some limits on it. There's a prohibition against short-term rentals, but the owner may qualify to live in the unit or rent the unit to qualified renter. So it allows a little more flexibility.
Ms. Woods,
Yes.
one interjection. I believe my colleague council person, Nora, had her hand up.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry if I'm missing hands, and thank you for bringing that to my attention. Nora,
Thank you very much, Nicole. And just a quick question that I think trying to wrap my head around a little bit again, the deed restriction and the affordable ownership space. So I understand requalifying income in a rental property, but what happens if you are a homeowner and you go back to school and suddenly your income has substantially increased with your new job? Are you then evicted from the house you have bought? I'm just trying to understand how ownership and income requalification annually.
Fair.
yeah, that's a really good.
I'm sorry, I didn't
Nora,
get the
I think-
question.
Nora, you're going in and out. It's like you're underwater, sweetie.
And I
I'm
think you
sorry.
had a very good question.
I'll send you a text with my question.
Okay.
Okay, I think what I heard was a question about, if we're putting in this, somebody buys a home through an affordable housing home ownership program. And, their circumstances change. They get a great job and their income is now, now they no longer fit the eligibility. So I think, there's ways to make accommodations for that. And then it also depends on, what you are giving to the homeowner in exchange for, what you are requiring the deed restriction for, like, what are you giving them? So in some cases, this isn't exactly the same, but if the homeowner is getting some kind of financial incentive for the deed restriction, then they might have to pay back some of it. For example, if they sell their house before the period, of the benefit. I know that's the case for some of the down payment assistance. But obviously, somebody is not, It's a very good question, and I'm sorry, I don't want to, I haven't heard of that as like a prevalent situation, but I can do a little bit more research on that and try to answer that specifically. And I see another hand.
Okay, I'd also like the record to reflect, as of 6:28, Councilwoman Diana Revolus did join the meeting. Diana, was there a question?
I appreciate you. Thank you, Chair. I do have a bit of a question, and just doubling back in what Councilwoman Nadjelski, Nora Nadjelski, I'm sorry, just said, but like, let's just say in the conversation in what you just spoke of, and particularly if there's an ownership with multi-units, multi-family, that would put an owner probably in a situation that financially, because of that multi-family dwelling and ownership of it, puts them in a better financial space that they would probably be prior to. And in ownership, having ownership, or even the restrictions and talking about the way things could be transferred over to family, is a part of actually helping a family increase their financial standings and generational longevity. So I think in that questioning, just to tag into that, I would hope that it would be narrated to make the person be in a space of having a better financial situation from where they started. If that makes sense, to that question, just to pilot that. If when you find out the answer, I would think this whole program, or why we would want these type of programs, is to see that the initial starts doesn't look like the end result with someone who started a program here, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it really does. And there is, I mean, I'll go into a couple other examples, which are more shared equity. In this case, that's just up on the screen. The owner can also qualify by renting the unit if it's a multifamily, or if they're not living in the house, they can rent it to a qualified renter. In this example from Colorado. And, okay. Some other shared equity models, and really the goal of shared equity models is to make a one-time investment, to make a home affordable for a lower income family, and then it restricts the home's sale price so it is sold to keep it affordable for subsequent low income families who purchase the home. And you can balance wealth building for families who otherwise would have been unable to afford owning a home with preserving the community's investment. And I will, Grounded Solutions goes into much more detail on that, but some of the models that, and again, I'm just touching on them here, but a shared equity cooperative, very common in New York City as a form of ownership, where a building is owned collectively, but the individual units are also owned by the co-op members. And I was looking into Village Creek a little bit. This may be an example of a shared equity cooperative. I don't think it had, sales price limits on it, but it did have a set of, the idea was based on a cooperatively owned, some common amenities. A community land trust is another model to look at a little bit. And again, I think they would warrant more research, and, don't necessarily fit, very tightly into the ordinance draft that you shared with me, but something to consider. So a community land trust is a nonprofit. It typically stewards land, and we know them, so in suburban communities, sometimes they're preserving, nature preserves, but it also, there are community land trusts that do develop affordable housing. And for those, typically the land underneath is owned by the nonprofit or owned collectively. And then the houses themselves are owned by families, and that reduces the cost of the land. And so it makes the houses more affordable. And then inclusionary zoning programs. Norwalk already has inclusionary zoning, and that's a value recapture. So that is where, because of the profit, that a developer can make, there's ways to incorporate, some affordable units in the mix.
Ms.
Oh.
Woods,
Yes.
since you're on this slide and you're talking about community, like equity models, when you're talking about community land trust, if there is an entity that owns the land and then the individual owns the unit upon the land, how is the collective individual, the organization getting money from owning the land? Or is it just like a in-kind kind of a situation?
So there's different models. And again, I can, I'm not an expert on like the structure of community land trusts, but LISC, and there is one in Hartford, and also that there's one in Hartford, and also there's one in Stamford which is closer to you, that the Housing Development Fund developed. And so that would be a good one to look at in Stamford. And they are allowed by state statute. So that is something, that can be done in the state of Connecticut. And just another, consideration. So when I was working for the city of New Haven, we did an ADU ordinance, so accessory apartment ordinance. And we were looking at different ways to make those financially viable for a homeowner. So in the Connecticut statutes, the definition of an affordable one has a period of 10 years at 80% of the median income. That's how the state defines an affordable accessory apartment. But that's just another, another tool in the mix to add affordability in a homeowner context. And I think that's it. This is just us. We're part of Regional Plan, Fairfield County Community Foundation, the Housing Collective, and Partnership for Strong Communities. And they've all done great research and advocacy for affordable housing. But I will stop my share right now and take any questions.
Okay, does anyone from the committee have a question or comment for Ms. Woods? Yes, Diane. Yes, Councilman Revolus.
Woman, I'm cool. We'll be able to get
Sorry,
these.
so sorry.
No, it's all right. We'll be able to get the slides, all right?
Yeah, I will share the slides and then some of the resources that I used.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you being here, truly, because you guys all know I kind of speak of hoping to see this in nauseam. So I just appreciate that. But these slides would be amazing to have to refer back to. Thanks.
Again, it was the hope of the share to give you additional resources to answer those outstanding questions we had, since our ordinance has already been written about deed restrictions and just general affordable housing and how it can look, the possibilities of what it can look like here in Norwalk. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. So any other questions from the committee?
Hi, I'm sorry. So do you mind just providing some examples of, sorry, the reasonable appreciation formula? Can you talk just a little bit more about that? You mentioned that and how it incrementally can adjust, like just talk about that a little bit more. Just give me an example of that.
Yeah, so I think the example I saw was from California, where they allowed, you know, a 15 to 20% appreciation. But I would like to you know, just look that up again, and I'm happy to, when I send you the slides, I can make a note to look that up, what the different, you know, different formulas that are out there.
Okay. And another question, do you find that folks who are in these units are able, let me back up. So we know Fairfield County, Connecticut, the prices are exorbitant. It's very difficult to even purchase a home outside of, you know, of living in one of these deed restricted properties. And so the idea to me is that the deed restrictions can be very restrictive, and that holds people back from being able to, you know, sell their home and then purchase in a city such as Norwalk or surrounding communities that have such high pricing. And so I think for us too would be, how do we find the balance of creating this type of housing, but not locking people in, right, where they can't really move forward? And if we talk about housing as being that thing to build generational wealth, I don't think that you somehow affordable housing and generational wealth don't add up at times, right? And so I think that's going to be something that we're going to have to struggle with or figure out, how do we do that? Because you don't want people to be stuck or not have any options to live in the state or the city that they want to live in, you know, but move up in this process. It's kind of a question statement and everything wrapped up together in one of my frustrations for a while.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
If I may weigh in, the inclusionary housing plans, they actually don't really restrict you to staying in the house or keeping the house forever. You can end up selling it eventually. Well, I would say like after some, depending where and how, they even have like after 5 to 10 years or something like that, where you can resell them, and it's just the profit that's made from it has to be reasonable. What reasonable really means, and that just, I guess it's down to the city and how they plan that out for the town. But eventually you can resell it. You just can't make too much profit off of it just because it's still an affordable housing.
Yeah. Thank you, Mari.
Darlene, did you,
That kind of answered it, but it's still, I think there are developments that hold people back. That's all I can say. That no matter what, you're never going to be able to afford anything in this state, and may not be able to afford much anywhere else based on the formula and the restrictions placed on some of those properties. I'm not sure, you know, how many developments we have in the city that are under deed restrictions, but I know of at least one that's not balanced at all.
So thank you for that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Councilperson Nora Najeski Eichner would like to add, she just texted me, these are her words. I think we should add some language about the requiring the restrictions to allow for some equity capture, but it probably should leave the details for implementation. That's a question to the committee, to add language to the ordinance that we've already established. Did I say that right, Nora? She's texting. Well, me and her are going.
Yeah.
Oh, she said I said it right. I don't know, does anyone have any thoughts about adding any additional language to the current ordinance after seeing this presentation.
Absolutely. I think that's a start what Nora wrote, and I think it needs to be there.
Okay.
Because that's going to be the guide to how we move forward with this. So I think it definitely needs to be included.
Diane, I saw your hand and it went down, but I just want to allow, if possible, other council persons to weigh in. Darlene says, yes, I do not have a problem. I think that's a smart thing that we should do. I think that's where we should go now that we have this additional information. Chairman Burnett, President Burnett, do you have any feelings on this?
I guess I'm not 100% clear as to the pluses or minuses as it relates to by adding it, or maybe we can, those that are in favor of it, what is the upside of adding this to the ordinance versus maybe adding it to the affordable housing plan?
For me, and I'm speaking not as a committee chair, I think it needs to be in both places. Equity is something that as elected officials is our buzzword and we like to throw it out. But my position is the true equity is in the way we work, in the legislation, in the policies that we provide. That's where you see our stand on equity. And so I don't think personally it would hurt to put it in the ordinance as well as put it in the affordable housing guide. Those two documents do not necessarily need to mirror each other, but they need to work in happy relationship with each other. And so I think just from a logistical standpoint, it would benefit if they had some shared language, if they had some shared concepts. But that's just my position. Councilperson Jen McMurray.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to reiterate what you said. I think that it doesn't hurt to have the language in both places. I think that they should complement each other, both documents. And I think that it just reiterates the point in both places. And so if a constituent or one of us is going to one document and not the other one day, it just verifies that. And I think, again, it wouldn't hurt. That's just my 2 cents.
I'm talking on mute. Good Lord. President Burnett, did we answer your concern?
Yes, you did. Absolutely. Thank you.
Any additional comment on this or a point that someone would like to raise?
Chairman,
Yes,
I
Councilperson.
just want to say kudos to you and thank you for arranging this. I think this was the appropriate next step in this process. And I think this is critical language to be included in both documents. And thank you to the folks who've come and given the presentation. So that's what I'd like to say.
Thank you for those kind words. But I cannot take the credit alone. Nora has really partnered with me in this. And she was very a key part of when we presented to the ordinance. And then me and her talked a lot to really understand what they were asking, because ordinance was, I was like, wait, what do you need? So I do want to also give Councilperson Nora her shout out to. The first hand I saw was Councilperson Jen McMurray.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. I just want to reiterate what Ms. Young said. Thank you to you and Nora for all of your hard work on this. I'm sure your back's hurt from carrying me anyway. But I also wanted to just ask, what is the next step after this? Because I think this was a very important step, and I'm so glad that you both guided us down this path. But I think, I don't know, what else is ordinance looking for? Are we going to continue to workshop this? What would be the inevitable next step for us?
And so I think the natural next step, and I also have to thank the leadership of President Burnett, who I kind of caught him in chambers, is like, I think we have an issue. And he was very gracious and kind to me. So I think our next step is we do need to flesh out that language that we just agreed that would be added to ensure that equity piece. And so between now and our next meeting, we need to have some conversation on how to flush out that language. I think at the next meeting, it would be appropriate to present that language so that the community, as well as anybody interested, has the opportunity to see that language, hear that language, and we have further discussion on that language. And so I guess it's workshop part 2 for July, just to help us get there. We're not rewriting the ordinance. Let me just say that for anybody in the public that is watching or listening. We're not going to rewrite the ordinance. It is a strong document as it stands. What we are going to do is add additional language to support this committee's position on equity within the scope of affordable housing. Councilwoman Diana, I saw your hand up, but is it down? Did I address your concern?
I just want to say, and I know it probably won't be addressed in this way. I do think this coming up, I will state that this is something that's been directly passionate for me to see happen here, and spoken to a lot of people here in nauseam again. So I'm just going to put my own name out there, but thank you for hearing that. Secondly, in this conversation though, too, there are in the housing, and in this being a program, also, are we also capturing programs too that help the concerns we're talking about as well? Because I brought up things like NACA and so on that can kind of go in tangent with things like, programs from Norwalk Housing where it comes to Section 8s that make these restrictions not as prevalent. So just wondering, because I've thrown that out there a lot too. There are programs within these programs that can help these stringent orders. And I'm not going to talk on a lot of them because I was a little bit late to this meeting. But it's a thing that I don't want to overlook and maybe could be brought up later on. I just don't know, in your expertise, have you seen that happen where, because this is a cohort of programs bringing up this this presentation to us, have you seen or worked with additional programs within that can help these restrictions? For example, like a NACA, where it's not only it helps additionally with the things like deposits, so on and so forth, but doesn't have the limitations there as well, and can help someone get into the same type of home ownership through these programs. It can help, possibly.
What I think that was directed to Ms. Woods.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Ms. Woods. I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah, in the program design, I would, definitely look at the programs, offered by Department of Housing and by CHAPA and some of the other nonprofit funders like Housing Development Fund for home ownership, and just to make sure that, maybe even, ask them to take a look at the ordinance to make sure it doesn't, cause a conflict with some of the available funding streams. I think also your city staff, I think, would probably be a good resource on that as well.
Okay,
And
thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Woods, for that. And just so that the committee is aware, the city staff, as well as people from the Norwalk Public Housing, has perused this ordinance. I just want to keep us right where we need to be. I want to keep us on the path. There will be an opportunity for this committee to then be a part of the Affordable Housing Manual. I think in the manual, it is the ideal place for all of the connections and partnerships and resources to live. I do not know, and if I'm wrong, someone can correct me. I do not know if it's appropriate to put that in the ordinance, because programs and things change. So when you're looking at the ordinance, which is a more lengthy structural legislative piece, you kind of stay away from acknowledging or naming certain programs unless it's something that is like embodied in the city charter or something like that. So I think just for our work for today, not our continued work because we have more work to do, but for our work today, I think it's just wise counsel if we not put those types of programs in. But I hear you, Councilwoman Diana, but I think there will be a time later on to add those named and unnamed entities into the actual manual. Councilperson Darlene Young.
I swear this is going to be the last question, but as you talk, just things keep coming up. And maybe you covered this and I just wasn't listening. And is the state still, do we still do co-ops? Do we still build co-op developments? Are we moving towards more home ownership or just renters in the state? Do you know? Has there been a trend of less co-ops or co-ops still a part of that housing plan?
Sure, I can, I mean, I can talk just generally at a policy level. I don't have any numbers right in front of me, but just as a point of clarification, I want to just say that I agree with the previous point that was made about addressing certain aspects of this in the manual or in the program design versus you don't want to, you know, be too prescriptive in the ordinance. So I just wanted to clarify that. I was I hope I was suggesting that as well. But to go to your question, Connecticut does, there was co-ops were very popular in the, in the early 70s. I haven't seen a lot of new co-ops, but there are, again, I don't, that's not an area that I researched specifically in Connecticut. But it would be, an interesting model to look at to see where co-ops are going. I will say home ownership is, folks having like a single family home. There's not a lot of land to, expand that in Connecticut. And so really looking at some of these shared models, especially in a community like Norwalk, which has a variety of housing choices, I think is, looking to see how you can do home ownership that's not just, in a single family large lot situation, but how you can do it as a co-op in an apartment building or, in a, also thinking about like a townhouse situation or condo situation. There's many ways that home ownership can look.
I just want to double back on that. I'm actually forgetting what other committee we're on, and I'm so glad to Ms. Young, and be with me in speaking that, because that's another thing I brought up a lot on. Home ownership does not have to look like you just said, the one family home dwelling. It doesn't have to look like it. And we can incentivize, like, for example, and I'm also speaking to the language of it in the ordinance, not the actual specific, but if there's language to working with additional programs and helping these problems, that's what I mean. But then secondly, like, let's just say we had, like you were talking about, what if a home that was a multi-dwelling 4-family, right? And the owner on that, and we gave them the, instead of selling, but having the help of keeping this at moderate rates, and we give them stipends or motivations to keep that at a an affordable multi-dwelling tenancy type of thing, that then will then help them, even in the ownership of it, grow and develop, where the land or that unit or that building, whatever you want to call it, itself still has stipulations. So therefore the owner can grow, people can continue within the dwelling to be affordable, and so on. So that's like an idea. So then bam, make that into a co-op ideal. You know what I mean? So so condos, townhouses, co-ops. We've talked about this in the other ordinance. I know Nora, not to be informal, but Ms. Ayers Ms. Najepli Eitner. We've all sat and talked about this and all brought up and have brought up this co-op or how ownership can look differently, especially in Norwalk and in the way we're developing. If we're developing this way, how do we make ownership look like a condo look, a co-op look, a townhouse look, but just give people a place and space to have generational growth here? Right? So I think if we put that and dive deep, I'm completely in agreement with Ms. Young, completely.
Thank you, Councilwoman Diana Revoluz. Ms. Wood, just lastly, just to support the comment that this was made, is there any best practices that you are aware of that we can glean from in this committee on how to put language around making housing more diverse and not just a one-family dwelling?
Yeah, I'm happy to do some follow-up and send some examples of that. And that's something, you know, we are very, especially in the Fairfield County context, you know, we see as really a critical to solving our affordable housing, you know, our affordable housing crisis, frankly. So, yeah, I'd be happy to get some language back to you quickly, or examples of language.
Thank you so very much for that. I just think that as our minds are processing this information, to have just some things to reference of how things could look would be beneficial for the entire committee. Is there any other outstanding questions for Ms. Wood or her colleague? Seeing and hearing none, we would like just to thank you on behalf of this committee, Ms. Woods, for coming and spending this time with us and giving us the additional information we needed, because we were kind of hitting our head against the wall. We are all very passionate about this topic, but not all experts like you. So we do really appreciate your time this evening. What am I supposed to do? Motion to adjourn.
You could do that? Okay, motion. I'm good.
Yes, I
I'll give it to you.
I'm the chair. I can act
No,
for
I
that.
know, that's right. Okay, I'm cool.
Okay,
I
so
didn't-
I receive the motion to adjourn from Councilwoman Diana Revoluz. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. Have a
Thank you,
good
Ms.
night.
Woods. Thank you, Ms. Furman.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Nicole Edie in the
Thanks,
audience.
Good night,
Nicole,
thank
Chairman
you.
Nicole. This was great.